Okay, and these should go right along with your notes too. When he was just talking about in the video St. Bartholomew, it's the saint that had his skin removed, and where was it at? Right there. So this is the Sistine Chapel, and you can see Michelangelo drew a self-portrait of himself holding the skin. It's blown up. And there's a statue of it. And these statues and poses, he usually has the scissors that he had to cut his own skin off with, or a knife. It's like this. But this is the Gunther von Hagen exhibit, and there's the classic drawing. Okay, so the skin, it's an organ and it's a system. When we talk about the skin, it's kind of like when we say muscle. Muscle can be a cell, muscle can be a tissue, muscle can be an organ, or sometimes we refer to it as the muscular system. So sometimes be careful with the wording. Skin is an organ, but it's also a system at the same time. About 2 square meters, so about 6 feet tall, about 3 feet wide. And then he talked about it being anywhere from 3 to 30 kilograms, which is about 6 to 60, 75 pounds, depending on how much what you have. Our skin's all pretty much the same, but what's sitting underneath it. Some people have more, some people have less. Fat, subcutaneous fat, right? And we look at other organs in there, like the accessories. We consider them usually accessory organs: sweat glands, oil glands, cerumen glands, like for ear wax, hair, and the nails. Right. Basic functions: the skin's there to separate the external environment from the internal environment. It does a lot of things, though. It keeps moisture in, it keeps heat in, it keeps bacteria, infective agents out. It helps make vitamins and vitamins and hormones. In fact, the vitamin that you know of being made in the skin is what? Everybody knows this, right? Vitamin D. When you're exposed to what? Sunlight. It's actually a hormone, but it has the name vitamin. And then we'll talk about that later. Helps regulate calcium. Helps get rid of waste products. So when you sweat, it's basically just like urine. It has urea in it. It has sodium, chloride, potassium. It has all the same stuff that your urine would have in it, except bilirubin or urobilinogen. So the next time you're at the gym and you're working really, really hard, and you take that towel and you wipe it all over your face, it's almost like you just wet it yourself. It's waterproofing. So you ever notice that the parts of your body that wrinkle when you're in water for a long time are what parts? Your hands and your feet. Yeah, it's the palm of the hand and the sole of the feet. They wrinkle up. They're not actually absorbing lots of water getting into your blood, but they wrinkle up so you get better traction when you're underwater. It's the theory. But it waterproofs you. Only things that love oil can easily pass across your skin. So if you take a drug that you put on your skin, what do you know about that drug? It loves water or loves oil? It loves oil. Yeah, so like nicotine, when they have the nicotine patches, they make the nicotine fat-loving or oil-loving, so it seeps into your skin, not water-loving. And then sensation, but here's a little slice of skin. We'll see this over and over and over again. Here are the main layers. The 2 primary layers of the skin are the epidermis and the dermis. The subcutaneous tissue, or subdermal tissue, is technically not actually the skin itself, but we'll talk about it a little bit anyway. So the epidermis is a superficial layer, and the epidermis is what type of tissue group? Look at the name. Epidermis. It's epithelium. Yep, it's all epithelial. What do you know about the blood vessels in the epithelium? There are none. When you ever hear of epithelial tissue, there are no blood vessels, and that's why you can get a paper cut and it doesn't bleed. For it to actually bleed, you have to go through and hit the dermis, and the dermis is packed with blood vessels. So it has lots of blood vessels to diffuse all the nutrients and oxygen up to the surface. And then again, I think I mentioned this last week, but if you have a lot of blood vessels here, and they have to diffuse all the nutrients, the further you get away from the blood vessels, what do you know about those cells? They're going to start dying, right? They start dying, and then you have all this layer of dead skin at the very surface, the superficial layer of the epidermis that's going to slough off. We'll talk about that. But you'll find things like glands that are in the dermis, the connective tissue. You'll find blood vessels. You'll find nerve endings. Nerve endings will actually branch all the way up into the epidermis, too. That's why with a paper cut, even though you don't bleed, you can still feel it, and it irritates the heck out of you. Right, and I found the 3 different layers that separates it. So you can see the highlighted layer of the epidermis here, the very surface, the superficial. Just deep to that, you have the dermis, and then deep to that, you have subdermis, or the subcutaneous fat area. And we're going to use to looking at a lot of microscope slides. Like for instance this one. Here's a light microscope. You can see at the very surface all these clear cells, and they're kind of a broken pattern because they're actually dead and they're falling off. What do you think this long, dark thing is that pokes down deep? Yep, it's hair. So the HF's for hair follicle. And you can see the repeating pattern kind of all over the place. You can see coiled up glands. They make their products down here and they squirt them out to the surface. Let's see. Here's another thing to look for. Remember, with epithelial cells, they always form a sheet. So if you find a continuous line like this that weaves all the way along, comes all the way down, weaves around this gland, comes all the way back up, that would be the epidermis. That would be the epithelial cells. Just below that, what are you always going to find below epithelial cells? Always. We mentioned it last week. What kind of tissue always sits underneath the epithelial cells? Connective. And we looked a little bit at the connective tissue that's just underneath, called areolar connective tissue. And as you look a little bit down deeper, you can see different patterns of fibers. You can see some fibers going this way, some going that way. You'll see some that come out at you. So here are several that come out at you. So if there are lots of fibers that are packed pretty tight, but they're all in different directions, do you remember what you call that connective tissue? First, is it loose or dense? So if there are lots and lots of them, very dense. And then if there are lots of different patterns, some coming out at you, some going sideways, some going diagonal, is it regular or irregular? Irregular. So in the connective tissue here, you have two types. You have the areolar that sits just underneath the epithelium, but then you have the irregular, dense connective tissue that sits down here. So you can pull your skin in lots of directions, and it's still strong. Then as you get a little bit lower, you can see the difference. Look at all these clear-looking cells. They kind of look like diamond rings. See the round circle here with a little diamond at the tip? So what do you know all of these are? They're all fat cells. What type of tissue does fat fall into? Nervous, muscle, connective, or epithelial? Connective, right. It's the other. So they put hypo here because it's either subcutaneous, subdermis, or hypodermis is what they call this layer. And this is for sebaceous glands or oil glands. We'll do that again. So two true layers of skin. You have the most superficial layer, the epidermis, which is epithelial. And what you absolutely have to remember is it's avascular. Just think of the paper cut. No blood vessels in the superficial layer. There are 4 or 5 different layers, but within those layers you have lots of stacks of cells. So you can have 30 or more stacks of cells going all the way up, but we subdivide it into 5 or 4 layers. And this isn't a mistake. Some areas of your skin are 4 layers, some are 5, and I'll show you how to distinguish which are which. And at the very bottom of that, it sits on a basement membrane that holds it to the connective tissue. The second layer, the deeper layer, the dermis, is the connective tissue. It's lots and lots of connective tissue. Just underneath the skin, you'll always find areolar connective tissue. So you might want to make a note of that. Just beneath the epidermis of the skin, you always find areolar connective tissue, which is a loose connective tissue. And then below that, you'll find a dense, irregular. It's the same pattern. So the dermis always at the top of the dermis that holds on to the epidermis is the areolar loose connective tissue. And then below that is the irregular dense. Lots of fibers going in lots of directions. So when you see all these cells, all these little spots that are really tightly packed next to each other and well organized, that's definitely epithelium. Layer after layer after layer after layer. But when you start seeing the cells splotchy and just randomly assorted, then you know you're into something else. In this situation, it's going to be connective. So through here, you see lots of airy spaces, lots of white areas. As you go a little bit deeper, you see the pattern change. Now you see lots and lots of fibers. So this area would be the areolar connective tissue. Down below that would be the dense irregular. All the fibers are going in different directions. And then the subcutaneous fat is technically not a true skin layer. So this is pretty much the extent we're going to talk about subcutaneous fat. So it has other names. It's called subcutaneous tissue, it's called the subdermis, or it's called the hypodermis. So for instance, when they first started giving injections to people, they went to the layer underneath the skin to give the injection. What do you call that? What's the name of that thing they stuck under your skin? A something needle. Nobody remembers this term? It's called a hypodermic needle because it goes underneath the skin. And then the layer is deep to the fascia. Of course, it varies depending on the person. So anything from low body fat content to high body fat content. And then the main purpose of fat, of course, is to store or to cushion or to keep you warm. And where we store it's different places too, like men primarily in the love handles and the belly, women usually in the thighs and the buttocks. When you look at a slide like this, try and identify different layers. Like for instance, right across the top, you can see this is clearly one layer, continuous. Here you can see a layer underneath it, that whole red line going through. You can kind of see a dark purple line underneath that, and you can see this whole area here. It's kind of mild purple with all these cells tightly packed. You can tell all these layers because they're so well organized are what type of tissue. They're one continuous sheet, epithelial tissue. And then it changes. There you see a cell, there's a cell, there's a cell, there's a cell, there's a cell. They're all randomly scattered cells, so it's totally some different type of tissue. And this one again, here it's areolar, but you can see a pattern, how it's kind of a similar color, but the cells are not organized like this, randomly scattered. So this is one type of tissue, loose areolar connective tissue. When you get below that, what do you think these things are? All these dark pink strands. What kind of fiber were they? Do you remember? The thick ones that look like rope under an electron microscope. Sort of the C. Collagen. Yeah, collagen fiber is really strong and really dense. Remember, the collagen is typically stained pink. When you look at reticular fibers or elastic, they usually stay black. And then again, you can see the cells. There's a cell, there's a cell, there's a cell. And what you're really seeing with the cell is the nucleus staining really dark. Here's an electron microscope picture. Here you can see the superficial surface of the skin. You can see all these dead cells all the way through here. So the epidermis, the first layer. It's epithelial tissue, which you want to remember, avascular. And it's keratinized, which is a word you should probably put a star by or underline. Keratin's a chemical, actually, it's a protein that we'll talk about. It's great for waterproofing. It makes it really strong. So it's almost like a little armor layer. When we look inside of it, the epidermis isn't just one cell type. It's a lot of different cell types. Well, actually, 4 primary ones. We're going to talk about those over the next slides. So here's your light microscope picture, and then you can see a cartoonized drawing of this, and we're going to go through each of those slides, or cells. So here are the cells. Another electron microscope picture. You see that big hair growing. Right. So the first one is the keratinocytes. Cyte means it's cell. Keratino is referring to what it makes. It makes a chemical called keratin. And they're the ones that give the squamous appearance. So all these cells through here are packed with a chemical called keratin, and that keratin's made by a keratinocyte. So again, watch for the words. Cyte just means it's cell. Usually the beginning tells you what it's making or what it does. Like a fibroblast or a osteocyte. What's an osteo refer to? Bone. Cyte means a cell. It's just a bone cell. If you see blast at the end of it, what's it telling you? It's a maker. So 90% of all the epidermal cells are going to be keratinocytes. They're found all the way through all 4 or 5 layers, which we'll talk about. And keratin's that tough fibrous protein. It gives a lot of waterproofing, but it also acts like glue or an armor. It makes it really strong. All of these cells are connected by tight junctions, which means they're waterproof. They also have desmosomes in them that make it so that they don't rip apart. So remember the 2 junctions. Tight is waterproofing like Velcro, it holds them together and waterproofs them, but desmosomes are what make them strong. That's why when you get a sunburn, you can peel a whole sheet of cells off at one time because of those desmosomes. What was the third kind of junction that's not mentioned here? Gap. Yeah, gap junctions. But they're not here. All right, sorry I mentioned those. And again, watch for the layers. All of these down here with the nice dark nucleus, these are cells that are alive and vibrant. You can see all the way at the very bottom layer, you can see almost every nuclei. But as you go further up, you can see the nuclei kind of disappear. And when you get up here, you see no nuclei. So what do you know about these cells with absolutely no nucleus? They're dead. Yeah. You can see them flaking off here, flaking off over here. And they're basically just sacs of keratin. Right, the next cell is melanocytes. They make a chemical called melanin. Be careful because there's another chemical in the body that sounds like melanin. It's called melatonin. Anybody know what that does? Helps you sleep. It's a totally different chemical. Melatonin is made in the brain for sleep. Melanin is made in the skin as a pigment. So there's stuff called melanocytes, or these cells called melanocytes. Where they're at is significant. They're all the way in the very bottom layer of the skin, the deepest layer of the skin. It's called the basal layer. But you can see them down here. It's making this dark pigment, and it's pushing the pigment up through little channels, and it's injecting the pigment into the keratinocytes to give them color. Its main purpose is to block UV light. It's not to make you look pretty, it's to block UV light. So the deep layer, those are the cells that are alive and vibrant and growing and rapidly reproducing. They inject this dark pigment as like a roof or a shield over themselves to block the light. Because if too much UV light hits these deep layers, what could happen? Yeah, it could destroy them. It could damage the DNA. All the DNA in here can be scrambled or broken. And if this cell has scrambled or broken DNA and it replicates, what do you know about its twin? It will also have scrambled, broken DNA. What could happen? What could you actually grow? Well, why do they tell you not to get too much UV light? Yeah, it could grow tumors or cancers. If you scramble the DNA in here, you break the DNA, it could become a cancerous cell. And if this, think about this, if there's a cancer cell growing way up here, and you're constantly pushing layers up, what might happen to that cancer cell? If it's way up away from the basement layer, it's closer to the surface, you might get lucky and it might just get sloughed off. But if it's way down here close to blood vessels, what might happen if one of these melanocytes turn cancerous? It's right next to a blood vessel. You ever heard of cancer spreading or metastasizing? If that thing's a rapidly replicating cell and it gets into the bloodstream, wherever it goes, guess what it's going to do? Rapidly replicate. Yeah, so these deeper cells are the most risky ones. When you hear about melanomas, that's one of the most dangerous cancers because they're melanocytes that have become cancerous and they get in the bloodstream and they can go anywhere and rapidly replicate in the body. So here's another interesting thing. There are only two colors of pigments. That's it. You have a black-brown pigment and you have a yellowish-red. It doesn't matter if it's in your hair or if it's in your skin. It's the same pigment, but only two colors. It's kind of like when you, well, actually I have a slide that talks about colors, but I was thinking, if you had two colors of paint to work with, are you stuck with just two colors as a final product? No, you just blend them back and forth, and that's why people have different hair colors and skin colors. It's a blend. So all of those melanin chemicals are made down here in the melanocytes, and then they're just transported up and injected into the upper, more superficial cells. And I already mentioned it's there to block DNA, or block UV light, sorry. Wrong way. I have a little cartoon. I wish this thing to pop up. But the cartoon you have down here in the corner, you see there's the blood vessel and the connective tissue. Here's the melanocyte, the dark one, and it injects its melanin up into superficial layers to protect. So UV light comes through and it gets blocked by that dark pigment. Next cell is Merkel cells. And Merkel cells are closely associated with the nervous system, so they're there for sensation. So you can see the surface of the skin. Way down deep here you have the little sensors. So for you to detect this movement, you actually have to push hard enough on the superficial layers that it bends the very bottom of the basal layer. The lightest thing you can detect is one bee's wing. That's as light as you can detect. So if somebody randomly dropped things on you, the lightest thing you'd be able to detect would be one bee's wing. So your skin's really pretty sensitive. Another thing that helps you locate things or detect things in your environment are your skin or your hair cells in your skin. So you have all these hairs. If something triggers one hair, you typically don't feel it, but if it triggers two, you feel it. And that's how a Venus flytrap works. See the little hairs there? If a fly lands here and doesn't trip these hairs, it's okay. If it trips one hair, it's okay. But when it trips two of them, then that Venus flytrap detects it and snaps shut on the fly. Same with your skin. Your skin detects things like pressure, vibration, movement. And the term for that is tactile. So tactile is kind of a fancy word for touch. So it detects touch sensations. The next one is the Langerhans cells, or the dendritic cells. Most of the books that I work with actually call them dendritic cells, but yours call them Langerhans, so I put both in. Right. Where you find them? Suprabasal, which means above the basal layer. Remember, this is the bottom, the basal layer. That's where you find the melanocytes. That's where you find the Merkel cells. But these Langerhans cells hang out just above that. They're kind of like guards. These are more closely associated with your immune system. So I like this little cartoon down here. They've stained them up here. You can see them all in black. But this cartoon, here they're detecting things. They're watching. They're standing guard along the bottom of your skin. If an invader gets in, when this dendritic cell detects it, it runs off to the lymph node and tells the lymph node, hey, there's something coming in through the skin over here. Bring the white blood cells in so we can attack it. That's what the white blood cells do. White blood cells will move into that area and attack whatever that chemical is. So if it's bee pollen, you get stung by a bee and it's bee venom, or if it's poison ivy, or if it's the bacteria that gets through the skin, this dendritic cell will detect it and then tell the white blood cells, the lymphocyte, come attack this thing and kill it. So the dendritic cell is more like a scout, where the white blood cells are the killers. And those were the 4 primary cells. Now we're going to talk about skin types. There are 2 types of skin. There's thin and thick. The thick layer obviously has 5 individual layers in it, and the thin has 4 of them. So another characteristic to look for right away, thick skin is hairless. Thin skin has hair. And even though in some parts of your body you think you don't have hair, like on your face, if you're a woman you think, well, I don't have hair on my face, you actually do have hair all over. It's called villus hair. It's really, really fine, thin. But there are 2 places in your body you have no hair at all on the skin. You know where they are? Palms and, bottom of the sole of the feet. So that's where you have thick skin. Places that take a lot of friction, places that rub a lot. So when you're using tools, you use tools with, either your feet or your hands, depending on what the tool is, I guess. Because they can handle the friction. They have thicker skin layers. And then thin skin is anywhere you have hair, and we'll talk about that. So thick first, and just mentioned it. Soles of the feet and the palms of the hands. And then you get these epidermal ridges all over the place. On the fingers, they're called what? The epidermal ridges. Fingerprints. But they're there for grip, not just for identification. In fact, identification was what we decided to use it for, but grip is why they're there in the first place. So the thick layers resist friction, has the frictional ridges, or the dermal papillae, which are also known as the epidermal ridge. And there are 5 layers, and you have to know the 5 layers. You gotta know it. And in order. So the deepest, so if you want to write closest right on basale, I think I have them. Do I have them numbered in yours? Perfect, yeah. So the basale layer is the deepest layer, which means where? It's closer to the surface or closer to your muscles? Closest to muscles. So I'm going deep and listing all the way up to the external environment. There are 5 layers here, and in thin skin there are only 4 layers, so I kind of stress this different layer. This lucidum is the only layer that's in the thick skin, but not in the thin skin. I'm a huge fan of remembering all of the basic rules and then looking for that exception. So I would definitely commit the lucidum to memory. It's the only one in the thick skin. And we're going to go through each of these 5 layers too. So nice little cartoon. You can see the basale all the way on the very bottom, the base layer, the basal layer, basement layer, however you want to think of that. And then right above it, they call it the spinosum because even though this doesn't show it very well, it actually has little spikes or spines in between the cells. We'll talk about those. Next is the granular layer. It has lots of granules inside the cells, so they call it granulosum. The lucidum is supposed to be clear. The granules have been destroyed, and it's a nice kind of clear layer before you go to the corneum, which is supposed to be perfectly clear. And I always think corneum like a cornea, the front of the eye that you can see through very easily. These are extremely clear. When you look at slides, you'll see that you can see right through these. They look like they're empty, hollow, like they're pockets of air, but they're not. They're keratinized cells. All right, so the deepest layer. This is the most rapidly reproducing layer. So where it says function down there, highly mitotic, it goes through mitosis really, really fast. It goes through mitosis really fast. This is also known as the stem cell layer. These stem cells, they can actually have potential to make lots of different cells. And then look for the organization. Anytime you see skin, you'll see a nice line, a dark line, where the basal layer is at. They have really strong nuclei, they're highly mitotic, they're reproducing, and you can see as you get further away from that dark line, the nuclei start disappearing until up in here you can barely see them. So look for the very bottom darkest line. That's the bottom of the epidermis also. Down here you can see the cells are all scattered. They're not tightly organized. They're not organized very well at all. And then about 10% of these are melanocytes that make that melanin. Right above that layer, slightly superficial, is a stratum, which means layer, spinosum. And the reason they call it that, like I said, is they have little spikes in between the cells. So if you go really close, you see all these little fine lines that hold the cells together. And if you count the cells, how high it is in numbers of cells, they usually have between 8 and 10 cell layers within that layer. 8 to 10 cell layers within the layer. So again, you're looking down here, there's the basal layer that's one color. You can see where it changes color. Now you're in the spinosum. So all through here you have the spinosum. So as these cells in the basal layer replicate, remember they make twins. It starts as one cell and it replicates and just pushes its twin above it. And then they start getting pushed further and further up. So that twin, as it gets further away from the connective tissue, it dies. This original cell stays in the basal layer. If anything happens to it and it gets flawed or defective, hopefully it kills itself. But if it doesn't, every cell it makes from that point on is going to be a tumor or a cancer cell. Third layer, so the granulosum. Like I said, it's packed with granules. You can see all these little specks. There's the cell, and you see all these little specks inside of it. And the specks are clumping of things like organelles. These cells are dying, so the structures inside of them are starting to clump together, almost like little clots. The nucleus is starting to fall apart. The organelles are dying. They're clumping. They're starting to get injected with all this keratin and all this melanin to give you color. And it can be 3 to 5 cells tall. Granulosum. And then the fourth layer, what was so special about this one? It's only in the thick skin. Yep. So it's called the lucidum. And the lucidum can be 3 to 5 layers thick. It's only in the thick skin. And it typically appears kind of clear or glassy when you look under a microscope. So here you can see, well, this is a spinosum layer. Here you can see the granule layer with all these little dark specks all over. But when they move into the lucidum, all those specks, those clumps, have basically gelled. So they look more glassy. Lucidum. There are no organelles. You've lost the nuclei. They're dead cells. And then the most superficial layer is the corneum. And the corneum is completely dead. And it can be 20 or 30 cells high. Really, really stacked tall. So far we're talking about potentially 45, 50 cells stacked one on top of each other in your skin. So if you go and you have microdermabrasion, what they do is they'll go along and they'll scrape most of this up, bless you, this corneal layer off of you. So now you see fresh, youthful, moist, wet skin underneath. Unfortunately, they also tell people to get this microdermabrasion not to get much exposure to sunlight or to wind or anything that can be like rough on the skin. because they've removed the real protective layers. And they're hoping that these new layers growing in look more youthful. And then because it's so thick, if you get a bacteria that's growing on the surface, the bacteria will actually eat at your skin. Hopefully you slough it off by the time it gets deep. And then fun fact for you, the average person sheds about 40 pounds of this layer over your lifetime. And then again, you can see the layers. You can see how crystal clear this layer is. It's kind of like the cornea of the eye. So if you're looking at identifying, if you can count, here's one layer, there's 2 layers. You can see this change here. 3, 4, 5 layers. What's the very bottom layer called? Yep, the basale. How about the one in between with the little spikes through here? Spinosum. How about the one right after it that has all the granules stuck in it? Yeah. So granulosum, and then right above that where they've all turned to a colorful gel. The lucidum, and then finally the one that's completely transparent is the cornea, corneum. And then thin skin. What do you already know about thin versus thick? You're missing one layer, the lucidum. So only 4 layers. It's everywhere else in the body. And then that has hairs in it. You don't find thick skin with hairs. So here you can see all the hair follicles going up and out. Cartoon drawing of it. So you can see the basale layer, the spinosum. What's the next one after spinosum with little granules in it? Granular layer, and then you skip over, you don't have a lucidum, you just go straight for the corneal, corneum. And then I put these in here so you can compare back and forth. In an electron microscope picture, here you see all this connective tissue through here. You can see the nice tight organization, all these cells lined up. They go all the way down, they dip around the hair, and they come all the way back up. Here you can see the superficial layer peeling off and flaking. There you can see the hair going down into the shaft and the very tip of it. So when they sliced across here, they cut the very tip of the hair off. So if we grab this, it should slide right out very easily. And then tattoos, they don't put, why do you think they don't put tattoos in the epidermis? Yeah, it's going to slough off. It'll go away. So when they give a tattoo, they have to inject it all the way down into the dermis and then put it in there so it stays more permanent. I think I want to get this tattoo right on the side of my face. Big spider. Okay. So not a lot about thin skin. So 2 layers of the dermis, the epidermis and then the dermis, but the dermis itself can be split in half. The dermis is all what type of tissue is it? Well, I shouldn't say all. It's primarily what type of tissue that I mentioned earlier. Connective. Yeah, it's holding the epidermis down. And then the upper part, look for the color changes to help you identify layers. You can see all these cells holding hands. That's still epithelial tissue. That's epidermis. But just underneath it, it's all kind of cloudy. And you see a cell there, cloudy, cloudy, cloudy. Another cell, a cell. There's a cell, there's a cell. Kind of cloudy. There are a couple cells, cloudy again. This is connective tissue, but it's loose connective tissue because you don't see a lot of dark fibers like you see down here. Loose connective. And do you remember the A word for this type of loose connective? Areolar. And then down below that, you can see lots of fibers. So when you change this very fibrous material, it's very dense, but they're not one steady pattern, so it's what? Irregular. Yeah. So some of these you can see coming out at you 3-dimensionally like this. Some of them going sideways, like this one, where they cut right along the fiber. Different patterns. Right, so up at the top, they call it the papillary dermis, the upper 1/5. And the papillary is that areolar. So the papillary dermis, the top 1/5 of the dermis, is packed with areolar connective tissue. Anytime you see CT in the notes, it just means connective tissue. So loose areolar connective tissue. And then there's the microscope drawing that we saw the other day when we were looking at microscope slides. And then there's the cartoonized version. So you can see all these blood vessels that flow through. You can see all the collagen fibers. You can see randomly assorted cells. Lots of that jello-like matrix. What's the What's that matrix area, the actual jelly stuff called? Its abbreviation would be GS, ground substance. Right? And then the primary reason for this little thin layer, it's not very thick, but it has lots of space. You want to remember that if something gets through your epidermis and gets down in here, you need to fight it off really quick. So there's a lot of space there for your immune system to go through. This layer kind of pushes up on the epidermis and gives it ridges or bumps. So the epidermis, the bumps, especially in the thick skin you see, are actually caused by the papillary dermis. And we call those ridges or bumps the epidermal ridges, or when they're on your fingers, we call them fingerprints. They're all the bumps, the projections that push upwards. And then why do you think there are lots and lots of blood vessels in this layer that sits right below the epidermis? Why would this have so many blood vessels right below the epithelial epidermis? Right, because all this tissue up here, there are no blood vessels at all. You need to have blood vessels right underneath so that you can get diffusion going out to keep all these cells alive. So in the areolar connective tissue, you have all this loose space all over the place, and there are blood vessels that run all through it, just along underneath the epidermal layer. There's blood vessel to nourish and feed everything. So here you can see the areolar connective tissue in an electron microscope. There you see a blood vessel, there's another blood vessel. You can see these little white blood cells hanging out, just waiting for an invader to get in. And lots of space in between for them to crawl around and chase the invader, the bacteria or the virus. The next one is the reticular dermis, and that's the rest of the dermis layer. Lots and lots and lots of connective tissue. So here you can see the collagen fibers and their pattern. Here's an electron microscope image of those same collagen fibers. You can see they look like ropes everywhere. Lots of directions, curling around, coming straight out at you. So it's packed with dense tissue, but it's dense, irregular connective tissue. You'll find a lot of elastin in there to give it snap back ability. So when you pull on your skin, you let go of it, it snaps back. What do you think happens with that elastin with time? Yeah, it ages. And in fact, the more UV light you have that goes down and damages those fibroblasts, the faster it ages. And then skin colors. There are three things that give your skin color. There's the melanin we mentioned before, but then we're going to talk about keratin and hemoglobin next. So first one, melanin. Two types of melanin, the yellow-red and then the brownish-black. And there's just this blending. Like I mentioned before, if you have two colors to paint with, you can blend the colors mildly until you get the color that you want. Everybody has the same number of melanocytes. Everybody. It's just what color pigment you make varies depending on the person. What do you call people that make no pigment? Albinos. They still have the same number of melanocytes, they just can't make the pigment. Their DNA doesn't have the code for the pigment. And then here's some situations. So melanin changing. With this one, vitiligo is where you lose the ability to make pigments. So you've probably seen this. I have a friend that has tattoos all over the place because when he was young, he started losing his skin pigment. He just tattooed over where it would have been. These people with no pigment at all. So you can see no pigments. And then sometimes you get that kind of that gold bronzing appearance. So some of the terms, freckles and moles are just pigment spots. Bronzing. Bronzing a lot of times has to do with an endocrine disorder. Unless you're getting a lot of sun, Addison's disease is actually the disorder. We had a president that had it. JFK had it. Keratin gets its name because of where you find it a lot that's not in the human body. Right, from carrots. So it gives, with a mild exposure to it or after eating a little bit of carrots or things like sweet potatoes, you get keratin in your body. Your body doesn't make it. You take it in. It has kind of a yellowish appearance, but if you eat too much, it gets more orange. So you can actually eat too many carrots and you start turning orange like a Oompa Loompa. They're orange, aren't they? I think. Orange with green hair or something. There was an episode of Scrubs that was about that. The guy ate too many tomatoes and carrots for some special diet, and he was turning this reddish orange color. Right, so lots of them, when you eat them, they can actually change your skin color, and you can see this person ate way too many carrots. And then the third thing that gives color is hemoglobin. Where do you find hemoglobin? In your blood. Yeah, if you're really cold and all the blood vessels in the surface of your skin squeeze and push the blood deep inside of you, what color does your skin start turning? So when you're really cold, it turns really pale, right? As pale as you can get. So if you're Caucasian, it turns practically white. It's because you've lost most of the blood at the superficial layers of the skin. If you're really hot and you want to cool your blood off, what do you think happens to all those blood vessels? They dilate, they open up like a radiator, and they push all the blood to the surface. Then what color do you turn? You turn red. It's the pigment, hemoglobin, that does that for you. And we'll talk about hemoglobin a lot when we get to the blood, but here you can see the heme, it's a little iron particle sitting inside of a protein, and you've got about 250 million of those proteins inside your red blood cells. When they're oxygenated, you actually rust that iron, you oxidize it, and it turns like this glowy reddy color, red light color. And when it's deoxidized, it actually turns more of a burgundy color. So it's not exactly purple, but it gives, when light bounces off of it and goes through the skin, it gives kind of a bluish purple appearance. And then hemoglobin flow, some different terms. Erythema is when you get this reddish coloring. And it's not just because of blushing, it's also things like fever. Anytime you open up a lot of blood vessels at the surface of the skin. Anybody here know what polycythemia is? Does anyone here know what anemia is? Anemia is when, what's the problem with blood cells? You have too few of them. Poly means many, so in this situation you have way too many red blood cells. If you have too many red blood cells, it gives more of a reddish appearance to the skin. Hypertension, high blood pressure. And so erythema is the reddening. Pallor or blanching is when it's turning white. And then cyanosis is when it turns blue. And this is called Raynaud's disease. Raynaud's disease, these blood vessels start clamping off. So what do you think is happening? Why do they have blue fingertips? This is not photoshopped, by the way. This is a real hand. Yeah, the blood's stuck there. These blood vessels up here are kind of clamping off, and the blood's not getting to circulating at the tips, so they're becoming all blue because they've lost their oxygen. You can see the baby's face is kind of blue around here. Loss of oxygen. A hematoma is a bruise. So here you can see different types of hematoma. So get hit in the arm. The blood escapes the blood vessel. Now it's trapped under the skin. You have to destroy it actually to get rid of it now. And then jaundice is when you have too much bilirubin. So you can see the yellow. Appendages, the things that are kind of like accessories. So remember, skin collectively is an organ, but the appendages are the things that are in it or hanging on to it. We'll talk about each of these. So here you can see a fingernail. I don't know if that's a toenail or a fingernail itself. I guess I shouldn't say fingernail. But there's where you can actually see the blade of the nail itself, and you can see the skin around it, the cuticle. Here you're looking down inside of a sweat gland. Here you're looking at actually oil pores around a hair, and the hair is coming up and out. So the first one, hair. And hair is protective, hair is really strong, hair is highly keratinized. It's full of that dense keratin material for waterproofing and strength. Keratin. You find everywhere that you have what type of skin? Thick or thin? Thin. Yeah. So again, whether you believe you have hair in parts of your body or not, you still have hair as long as it's not the palms or the soles of the feet. But this keratin is called hard keratin. It's not quite the same as what's in the skin, because the skin's more flexible. It has soft keratin. But everything in the hair is so tightly and densely packed, we call it hard keratin. The same with the nails. Your hairs and your nails are the same hard keratin. The hard keratin doesn't flake off. It's way stronger and way tougher. And here you can see a cut, like a split end, basically. Here you can see the hair coming down in. They sliced across it. There you see the epidermis going all the way through. And then you see where it becomes loose connective tissue underneath. And the hair structure. So the different parts of the hair to get familiar with. And I think I put a picture of the hair in your notes, didn't I? Yeah, page 70. So the shaft itself is the part that comes out. And have you ever heard that myth or that thing about when you die, your hair continues to grow even when you're dead, after you're dead? It's a myth. So the reason that they said this originally is that anyone know what day of the week it's most common to have a heart attack? Well, I'll give you a hint. If you make it through today, then you should consider your week better off. It's Mondays, yeah. When people get up on Mondays, you have a relaxing weekend, you get up, Mondays suck, they're stressful. So what would happen is that the guys would get up, getting ready for work, they'd shave on Monday morning, they'd go to work, and then have a massive heart attack on their way to work. So when they died and they threw them on slab in the morgue, back in the day, they didn't have refrigerated slabs, so the skin would, well, still even today with refrigerated slabs, the skin would start drying out. They have this fresh shave, but now the skin starts retracting because it's drying out. When you shave, you don't actually remove the whole hair, you just cut what's at the surface. So as the skin starts pulling back, what's going to happen to the hair? It doesn't grow, it just gets exposed. Yeah, now you're starting to expose it. So they'd be on the slab for 3 days, and after 3 days it looked like they had some stubble, like the hair was still growing. The hair stops growing after you die because hair is made by living cells which need oxygen and nutrients. When you die, I don't know if you knew this, you don't get more oxygen, you don't get more nutrients. So they all die. Yep, it's a myth. Right, so there's the shaft itself going down. Oops, did I run over time? No, I've got a few minutes. Right. All the way down here at the bottom is the root. And the root's where everything's made. The hair is made down here, and it just keeps getting pushed up taller and taller and taller. So that the oldest cells obviously are at the top. Like when you wax, you take the hair and you pull it completely out all the way down to the root. So when it grows back, number one, thinner, and it takes longer to get exposed to the top. When you shave, you just clip this off. The longer this has been growing, the thicker and the darker it gets. So when people wax, it comes back as a thinner, more delicate hair, but when you shave, by 5 o'clock, you already have that shadow, firm, thick hair. When you slice across the hair, there are 3 layers, and these two layers are names that you should commit. A lot of times when you talk about organs, they refer to this the same way. The medulla is the middle or innermost layer, and the cortex is closer to the surface. So the medulla is right down the center. The cortex means bark, like bark of a tree. The only thing that's confusing about when you use it on a hair is there's one extra layer on the outside of the hair called the cuticle. So you've got the medulla down the center, the cortex around it, and then you have the outer layer that's flaking off called the cuticle. 3 layers. And then the colors because of the melanocytes. And the melanocytes are all down here. They're in the basal layer. This is epithelium. It has the melanocytes, and they just inject it into the keratin, or around the keratin, and give it color. And then with time, as these melanocytes mutate, they can't make that pigment anymore, and what color does your hair start turning? Or I shouldn't say what color does it turn. It has a lack of color, which is actually clear. Yeah, you turn gray. So if you take a gray hair, and you pluck it, and you look at it, it's actually more clear because it has no color to it. It just looks more gray. I think we just ran out of time. Oh, we have 1 minute, but not enough time to cover this one. So we'll stop right there, and I'll see you tomorrow.